Hello, everyone. This is Eric, aka the Political Demon, coming to you live in the Lone Star State of Texas, where we talk about politics and anything pertaining to Texas. Now, back on X, we talked a lot about the recent events of political violence, with the recent shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner being the earliest example of it. We also talked a lot about how many people believe Trump has expressed dictator like tendencies, even though what he has done is tame compared to previous administrations. Now, unlike many other countries, we choose our leaders and representatives, a concept many young and even older voters don't seem to comprehend due to political tribalism. So, in today's topic, I want to go overseas and delve into what an actual dictatorship is like. Yes, the country is in Asia. No, the country is in China, Russia, or even North Korea. The country I'm talking about is none other than Myanmar. Now, I took a keen interest. I took a keen interest in Myanmar as a democratic government because it has historically been marked with short periods of parliamentary or elected civilian rule. They repeatedly became constrained by military interventions and subsequently had to limit democratic powers in electing its leaders. To abbreviate its democratic history, they went through a grand total of three different constitutions. Two of them, the 1948 and 2008 constitutions, being a hybrid democratic system, while the 1974 constitution enshrined a one party government. To better understand Myanmar's democratic history, the drafting process of the 2008 constitution could get us a better feel of their system throughout the decades. Since the 1974 Constitution's abolishment on September 1988, the State Law and Order Restoration Council, or the SLORC, has controlled the region under emergency rule. On the same month, the council announced they would hold multi-party elections on March 27th of 2027. Oh, no, it's like March 27, 1990. It's a bit of a typo I had. Now, the Burma Socialist Program Party was effectively sidelined this election due to their actions that led to the 1974 constitution being abolished, later dissolved, forming the National Unity Party, or NUP. The NUP Party was the party of the Tamata, which is the government force surrounding the Myanmar government, supported in the 1990s elections. One of the people campaigning at that time was none other than Aung San Suu Kyi, the daughter of Aung San, i.e., the father of Myanmar, who played a pivotal role in Myanmar's post 1974 democratic struggles. Originally returning to Myanmar in March 1988 to care for her mother, she emerged as a central figure in the pro democracy protests, becoming a co founder of the National League for Democracy, or NLD, a week after the coup. Despite being ineligible to run due to being under house arrest since 1989, she was still able to help her fellow NLD colleagues run for office across Myanmar and played a central role in electing its leaders since the 2010 elections. In May 1990, democratic elections were held for the first time since 1960, before the 1948 Constitution was abolished 2 years later. The NLD won roughly about 80% of the parliament's seat. However, the council did not convene the legislature. Instead, they redefined the election into an election to a constitutional assembly tasked with drafting a new constitution. Either they're very bad at writing or they really don't want to give up power. Now, the process culminated in a military drafted 2008 constitution. Like the 1948 constitution, it created a bicameral national legislature known as the Piandangsu Hutla, which is Myanmar's parliament, with the Piafu Huluta being the House of Representatives containing 440 members, and the Amayotha Aluta being the House of Nationalities, which is the Senate, containing about 224 members. Although, unlike the previous constitutions, the 2008 constitution would not create the prime minister positions and contained provisions where 25% of each chamber was given to the military representatives appointed by the president and Tamata, which in the PFU, they would contain about 110 out of 440, and the Amayotha containing 56 out of the 224. In addition, a provision where you need 75% approval requirement from Parliament for constitutional amendments was included. This gave the Tamata veto power over any amendment that changes the Constitution, including provisions that might undermine their influence. After its ratification, the November 2010 elections followed suit. Despite this progress, the NLD boycotted the election, citing undemocratic provisions that included the Tamata disqualifying many of their members from running, including Suu Kyi, who again, she was very influential in her party, and it'll be very detrimental to not have her on the ballot. When the demands were not met, the NLD chose not to participate in the 2010 elections. The military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party, or USDP, garnered a majority in the PFU Haluta and the Amayotha Haluta. The Shan and Nationalist Party, or SNDP, was the biggest minority party in parliament. Former General Theng Sheng was elected president. And to many of y'all who don't know about him, he was the reason why the recent coup occurred back in the 1970s. In 2011, the State Peace and Development Council, originally the SLORC, until 1997, officially relieved control and transferred its unilateral authority to Parliament. Under Sheng's administration, he began releasing political prisoners, eating media censorships, and amending/revising restrictive laws on the right to assembly and self-autonomy. A key change in late 2011 removed barriers that prevented ex-prisoners from joining parties. This allowed the NLD to participate in the democratic process and allow people like Suu Kyi to become qualified to run for office. A 2012 by-election was announced to fill out the remaining seats that were due to the resignations for those who decided to go into the Shan administration, and a few dozen being unfilled/void during the 2010 elections due to the NLD's boycott. And, well, if you don't have the NLD, much of those communities are not going to vote. A 2012 about 44 seats were up for election in 2012, and 43 out of the 44 seats were won by the NLD on election day. Suu Kyi took her seat in the PFU, becoming leader of the opposition, i.e. minority leader in U.S. House terms. The USDP retained their overall majority, while the SNDP gained a seat in the Amayotha. The 2015 election gave the NLD a blowout majority against the SNDP, winning about 79% of the contested seats nationwide and effectively flipping the Tatmada's dominance in parliament. The results enabled the first civilian-led government in decades. Unlike the 1990s elections, the Tamata congratulated the NLD and peacefully transferred power to them in March 2016. They would then elect Hitin Kya under Suu Kyi's recommendations. Kya would become the first president to be elected to the presidency in Myanmar that has no correlation with the Tamada since UNU in 1948. Suu Kyi would then be appointed to the newly created state councilor position, overseeing ministries except those reserved for the Tamata, e.g. defense and navy. Despite the 25% seat being reserved for the Tatmadaw, the NLD government was able to pursue several priorities within the hybrid system's limits. These include expanding upon Sheng's policies on improving ethnic minority relations through the National Ceasefire Agreement with limited success, releasing political prisoners in phases, and amending revising media restrictions, with some being reversed later on due to, well, you kind of get why. Economic and administration reforms to bring in foreign investments and improve Myanmar's infrastructure, though limited due to ongoing internal conflicts. There have also been key examples of the NLD allowing the Tatmadaw to take charge in moments of crisis, despite the narrative about the government and the democratic groups just hating each other. One of these examples is the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, or ARSA, attacks on security posts across the northern Rakhine state, which is the southwest parts of Myanmar, in 2016 and 2017. By late 2017, despite future sporadic attacks occurring, the ARSA presence was largely dismantled in Rakhine. However, in sending in the Tamata to handle the situation, it caused dozens of village burnings, mass killings of dozens to hundreds of civilians per village, mostly Rohingyas, gangs sexually assaulting civilians, looting and displacing about 87,000 Rohingyas. More than 700,000 Rohingyas fled to Bangladesh due to this conflict. This humanitarian crisis would ultimately test the NLD-Tatmadaw relationship when pressed on accusations of ethnic cleansing by the International Court of Justice. Suu Kyi ultimately defended their actions due to the ARSA's killing civilians, police, and military personnel indiscriminately in much larger numbers, citing local reports of the ARSA carrying out attacks on Hindu and Muslim civilians that they view as collaborating with authorities. She also referenced the August 25 through 26 bombing that led to killing dozens of civilians in the process, including women and children. She and many other Myanmar officials at the court hearing stated that had the Tatmadaw not been allowed to go in there to quell the insurgents, more death and destruction would ensue, more than when the Tatmadaw was doing. And this is still debated to this day. Whether you think about the Tatmadaw in the negative or positive light, one has to take into account of terroristic attacks within the state's government. Now, that relationship would soon become more strained in November's 2020 elections. Despite pushback among the public towards the Tatmadaw and NLD's military and economic actions throughout the 5-year term, the NLD would garner a bigger majority in parliament, winning roughly 83% of the contested seats. The USDP subsequently lost seats in both chambers. The junta and USDP immediately alleged widespread voter fraud, including voter list irregularities, i.e. identity fraud through duplicated names and improper resignation cards. Somewhat similar to what we went through back in America in 2020. They called for the Union Election Commission and multiple townships to postpone the parliament's opening to investigate. However, they all refused, citing that there were barely or no irregularities among them. On February 1st, 2021, the Tatmadaw staged a coup against the current president, Win Mint, Councillor Suu Kyi, the NLD as a whole, and their officials/allies. They would appoint Min Sui as the pro tem president until a new president is elected after the suspension. In doing so, they suspended the 2020 parliament and effectively nulled the 2020 elections. They declared a state of emergency, halting the 2011 and 2021 hybrid civilian democratic section. This triggered as you guessed, it triggered a lot of mass protests through a civil disobedience movement, through the philosophy of Martin Luther King's nonviolent protests, the formation of a parallel national unity government, which was formed under former NLD and other elected officials that didn't take kindly to the Tatmadaw taking over, and escalation into multi-front civil war through groups like the People's Defense Force. Myanmar would not hold a general election until late 2025 and early 2026, but it was only conducted in areas under the Tatmadaw's controls, which was about 236 out of 330 townships. And as you can see up here, this is pretty much the current territory of where we are now, with the orange representing the military junta's control and the blue representing the resistance. Many opposition parties were either forced to sign a pledge of loyalty to get on the ballot, dissolve due to coup and pledge, or boycott the election as a rigged system to keep genuine opposition from running against the USDP. Which they're not entirely wrong. This is some bull. After the election, Min Aung Hlaing, the military commander-in-chief that led the coup against the NLD, was elected president by the USDP Tatmadaw-appointed parliament. And this pretty much just entirely wraps up its democratic history in Myanmar. But what does Myanmar's long, painful cycle of democracy, coups, and hybrid rule teach us? Well, based upon Samuel Huntington's 1968 Political Order and Changing Societies, he introduced the concept of Praetorianism, where he argues in divided societies, civilian political institutions are often too weak or too fractured to manage social conflicts. When that happens, the military steps in as the default stabilizer. And if we are to reference the 1948 and 1974 constitutions were abolished, the 1948 dealt with a lot of ethnic insurgents among racial minorities, and the 1974 was dealing with a major economic crisis. Shocking, I know, considering their party is literally named Socialists. When this, in Myanmar's case, When they gained independence in 1948, the ethnic insurgencies erupted because of the prolonged agreement's promises of autonomy for frontier areas were never fully agreed or honored. And throughout the decades since then, parliamentary democracy has not been able to contain them, unlike what America did back in the late 1700s. Because, well, America. The Tamatau did not see itself as a power grabber, as many political analysts want to say, but they see themselves capable of holding a fractured, multi-ethnic country together. Even to this day, they still view themselves as guardians of the Union. Heck, even China has expressed this kind of mindset when they violate First Amendment rights of their own people. But it's a complicated situation. It's a lot more complicated for most people to understand. Now, this can be tied to another one of Huntington's theories, which is the civil-military relations theory. In his 1957 work, The Soldier and the State, he argued that the best way to ensure civilian control is to make the military professional, i.e. politically neutral, which is it's impossible to do from a political standpoint, because no matter the administration, they're always going to bend to a specific way. But the overall goal of it is to ensure the state does not fall apart. The 2008 Constitution applied this theory into action, giving civilians more space to run the economy and day-to-day affairs, while the Tamatau was tasked to run the defense and interior ministries and selecting number of seats in parliament to influence constitutional amendments being processed into what they view as what might threaten Myanmar's sovereignty and risk having them being attacked by someone like China. Steve Ladinsky and Luke and Ray best describes Myanmar's hybrid system in their 2010 book, Competitive Authoritarianism, Hybrid Regimes After the Cold War. Elections occur, opposition parties compete, but the deck is stacked to the point that the military never truly loses enough to the point that they feel they can push back. The military shockingly panics. That panic brings us to the ethnic federalism problem that pretty much started this entire constitution being enacted, revoked, paused at the moment. Myanmar is one of the most ethnically diverse countries in Asia, with the Bamar people making up 2/3 of Myanmar's population, or 35 million out of 55 million. Aren Lepard described this as evidence that societies require real power-sharing arrangements to ensure stability and avoid dominance by the majority. But to an extent, you have to balance it out. Otherwise, you're just going to create a new oppressor and a new oppressed group. The NLD have sometimes looked to ethnic minorities and the Tamatau like another vision of Bamar dominance, appeasing the minority. When the military saw the NLD winning bigger majorities in 2020, while ethnic peace talks in the economy was wobbling under COVID-19, it fell back to its oldest fear. The civilian rule would lead to national disintegration. The uncomfortable truth for democracy fanatics is that democracy is fragile precisely because it trusts the voters to choose leaders who might be great at winning elections, but terrible at handling emergencies. We just have to look back to Jimmy Carter when it came to the prisoner talks and George W. Bush on his events in Iran. The Tamatau has repeatedly made laws and decisions that harm their people, e.g. currency demonetizations, economic isolation, brutal counterinsurgency tactics, and so on and so forth. I do not dispute this as proof that the Tamatau has repressed their people, but civilians have also shown tendencies of being ill-equipped when the house is on fire. This is not an excuse for coups, but it is a core tenet of why many countries' junta believe they are the adults in the room. Now, despite all the troubles Myanmar has gone through in its attempt to promote democracy, the process has not altered the fundamental power dynamics or resolve underlying grievances over federalism and accountability. They're still in the works of House Joe, and they are creating a new prime minister seat. While the election was rigged, it is a start to push back into the more democratic session. You know what I mean. Many news organizations and politicians point to fascism as to why these coups occur, but looking through Myanmar's democratic history paints a different picture. The Tamata have become too wary and to an extent paranoid in how Myanmar officials have handled internal conflicts and prevent national disintegration. The balance between these two institutions in Myanmar showed how fragile democracy can be. One mistake can lead to chaos in the region. To see many Americans not fully understand the concepts of democracy and fascism will never surprise me. We are only human after all. If there is minor disagreements, we like to assume the worst of our elected officials. When critics labeled a twice elected president a king or dictator simply because he challenges bureaucratic norms, pushes back against media narratives, or use blunt rhetoric like average New Yorkers, they reveal more about their political tribalisms than genuine concerns of being actual threats to the republic's democratic process. Myanmar's story is a cautionary mirror. When trust between elected leaders and security apparatuses collapses, fragile democracies can spiral into cycles of intervention, resistance, and suffering for everyone caught in the middle of it. The real test is whether we do or do not forget that the ballot box, not the military or mob, remains the legitimate arbiter of democracy and stability. In Myanmar today, the lesson is still being written in blood. I pray America does not have to go through what Myanmar went through. Though, knowing what happened to Charlie Kirk, we may be on the verge of a similar situation. Thank you for tuning into this episode. This is Eric, aka the Political Demon, and I hope to see y'all in the next time I make a live session. Have a good night. May God help us all.